All right, welcome back. So, welcome to Twilight Revisited, the podcast where I, your host, Rio, will go through Twilight chapter by chapter and talk about the characters, the plot, fandom, author, all that is Twilight, and in my opinion, quite like a genre-breaking, generational-making thing. Like I said, my name is Rio. I am an actor. I'm living in London right now, and I am, to my core, a fangirl. And I've always been a fangirl. This podcast will take the first book of Twilight, kind of very chapter by chapter, where we'll really read each chapter. I'll plan out excerpts and stuff that we'll read together, and I'll make comments and stuff. And then also at the beginning of every episode, we'll have a research theme or subject or question, such as who is Stephenie Meyer, the author of Twilight? How did Twilight come to be? Also, specific characters' backstories that we never get to really explore fully, and certain fandom drama, like when Stephenie almost got sued. Also, we'll talk about Midnight Sun and the whole Jacob Renesmee thing. There are lots and lots and lots to cover, all right? First of all, I do just want to say, yes, I'm making an entire podcast about Twilight. What is there to be said about Twilight that has not been said yet? Okay? In my opinion, lots. Because if you go on any kind of social media right now, but specifically if you go on YouTube, and you search Twilight or Twilight commentary or watching Twilight or those kinds of videos by creators, most you'll find are people rewatching the films or watching the films for the first time all the way through, making commentary about how ridiculous it is and how horny it is and how weird it is and how bad the acting is and how bad the writing is, etc., etc. And yes, you can make arguments for all of those things. I'm not going to sit here and say it's the most amazing thing that's ever been made, ever been created. But I am also going to sit here and say it is the most amazing thing to have ever been made and created, right? And you can look at the criticisms of Twilight, of how it's bad writing, how it influences young girls very badly, how it's toxic relationships, how it's about, a girl who has no personality, how it's people's brains or whatever. But people aren't actually making the valid criticisms, in my opinion, that we need to talk about when it comes to this book series. I'm very much a like a commentary YouTube girly, I would say. But I mostly watch like the likes of Mike Smike and Uncali and Nicole Raffi. This is deeply, deeply inspired by all of these people who are, recapping plots of our kind of teenagehood TV series, films, books, things that had like really deep impact on us. And for me, there have been quite the many series and the many. Can you actually hear outside when they are screaming? I don't know. There has been a lot of series and books that have had a deep, deep impact on me, and Twilight really was one of the first ones. And so, with how I feel personally, with the way Twilight is being misrepresented online, I find it very, very important for me to really deep dive into this series. I really wanted to examine this story to see if the criticisms of Twilight are valid, honestly, to be completely honest, because I am a fangirl, like I am. I might not be a woman, I might not be a girl, but I am a fangirl. Like that's a part of my core. That's my soul. You know what I mean? And I've gone through periods of, really not being like other girls, and then periods where I'm like really embracing being like other girls. But I do think growing up as a teenage girl, and I'm specifically also speaking from like the white perspective of being a teenage girl as well. Like when I'm talking about girlhood, I'm talking about white girlhood, because obviously if you're a girl of color, like racism is going to deeply affect you. Misogynoir, colorism, that's going to make your experience quite different. But we will, talk about the racism of it just a bit later in the series. I really started embracing the Twilight Renaissance again, probably around 2018. And during this, I started to really examine why I was embarrassed of carrying around my Twilight book in my backpack or pulling it out on the bus or, talking to people about what I was reading. Like, I'm one of those people who get really, really, really obsessed with the things that I like. Twilight being one of them. And for some reason, every time I bring my book out of my backpack, when people ask me what I'm reading, so many of them go, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that's so cringy. Why would you do that? Why would you spend time on that? Why would you... Annoying. And then when I actually ask them, oh, why don't you like Twilight? Or, oh, why, none of them can actually give me a valid reason. Like, all of them just go, oh, isn't it just like really bad? Isn't it just really cringy? Isn't it just bad representation? He's 100 years old. He's really creepy preying on a 17-year-old. And it's so creepy how it climbs in through the window and watches her sleep. And but she has no personality. Why would you want to write or want to read from the perspective of a girl who wants and needs and thinks nothing? All of these are wrong. And I'm going to tell you exactly how, but we'll get there. I want to reiterate that if you don't like Twilight, that's completely fine. This series is probably not for you. I don't really know why you are here if you don't enjoy this, because this is dedicated to this saga. So if you don't like the saga, why would you spend that much time listening to someone gush about it? But just to say, it's completely alright if you don't like Twilight because of the way that it's written. Also because of, whatever. I do want you to just very gently examine the reasons why you don't like it. Because if it's embarrassing, then I want you to question why you find it embarrassing. If your reasons are, I don't enjoy the way that indigenous people are portrayed in it, it makes me feel really icky. That's so valid. We will talk about that. That's so valid. And I completely agree. The way that indigenous people are portrayed in this, the way propaganda is happening just right before our eyes, is very disgusting. But I do feel like there is worth in talking about it and examining that further, rather than just kind of putting a label on it, saying this is bad, shoving it to the side, forgetting about it. There is just so much to say about this. Even if she keeps releasing these types of stories, there are just 1,000 things that, in my opinion, need to be out there for the people. And if you don't want to do your own research, here I am. I am here to do that research for you. So you can really just relax, sit back. We're going to go through each chapter, read a little bit, comment a little bit, have some fun, do some research. Let me introduce you to the Bibles that I'm using. So first of all, obviously, this season of this podcast is dedicated to Twilight, the first book. It looks like this for anyone watching. I'll describe the cover to the people listening if you've lived under a rock and you have no idea about this series. The original cover of Twilight is black and it has two very pale hands, kind of prayer-like, holding an apple, very red apple in the middle. And it says Twilight in this very kind of embellished in a way, the G has a little swirl, and it's iconic. You need to understand the weight that this series has on the fandom and on the world. I believe we wouldn't have the kind of the YA dystopia, the YA fantasy if it weren't for Twilight. I don't know if you ever read the series Evermore, but I think I probably read Evermore before I read Twilight, and it's this very, very niche vampire romance. And I think it was released after Twilight. And then you also have other stories that came after Twilight that also have vampire romance themes, like House of Night. That's an entire thing in and of itself. How old was I? 13 maybe, perhaps? It's a 12-book series, something ridiculous like that. And it's basically about this girl who I don't even know. She finds out that she's a vampire. All vampires have like this tattoo in their forehead. And she goes to this vampire academy where you learn how to be a vampire and how to kind of, grow your powers, etc., etc. And then obviously there are like evil things happening at the school. But most specifically, sucking blood is an overtly like sexual experience between vampires and humans. Like, it's pleasuring. And so there are like just like really graphic scenes in the book written for basically 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, I don't know, teenagers, where the people are just like doing it. You know what I mean? But like with blood. And also there's a point where the main character, she gets off with her teacher in a closet, and that's when I stopped reading. As a 13-year-old, that was like a little bit too much for me, personally. But this is all to say that Twilight really started this kind of like vampire craze or supernatural craze. But it's not always, like, it wasn't the beginning of it all. Like, we've always had a fascinating relationship between human and beast. Like, Dracula is very mystified and also quite sexual. The same goes with like Frankenstein. Like, the monster is supposed to be like quite beautiful. And, you know, like the relationship between Frankenstein or the Frankenstein's monster. Sorry. Oh my God. I'm going to piss off so many people. I haven't actually read Frankenstein. No, the relationship between Professor Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster is, well, kind of supposed to be a love story, right? I think vampire symbolism of like the undead and drinking blood, like that has always been covertly kind of sexual. It's like cannibalism right now. Cannibalism is so chic right now. I've always been a big fan of cannibalism. Not in relation to like actually eating people, but you know what I mean. Cannibalism is really in right now because of the symbolism surrounding kind of consuming, and specifically consuming your lover, like Ethel Cain vibes. The other point of resource that I have that isn't the internet is the illustrated guide, also written by Stephenie Meyer. This book was released 2011. Basically, the illustrated guide it's a book that collects interviews, backstories, art, all kinds of information, extra information that is collected by Stephenie Meyer herself, meaning that all of this is canon. Like, in here it's written about vampire nature, it's written about all of the different clans, all of the different, you know, the werewolf lore that we might not get to fully kind of see in the saga itself. It's written about the Volturi, the lair of the Volturi, or the entire guard, by the way, and I'm so excited for the episode where we will fully get into each of the vampires in the Volturi guard, talk about who they are, what powers they have, how they got there, etc., etc. Like, so much backstory of people that you only get like very few glimpses of. Also, like a full plot breakdown of each of the books. Very helpful for this podcast. Fan drawings, all the like different kinds of covers around the world, and just, yeah. All right, I think we should really get into it now. Our research question for this episode this week is the beginning of Twilight. Okay, so how did Twilight come to be? So this series is written by Stephenie Meyer. By the way, if you're a person who believe you can spell Stephenie Meyer correctly, I really, really recommend you right now, find a pen and paper, write down Stephenie Meyer. Please do it right now. I'll give you 10 seconds. I'll have a sip of coffee while you do it. All right, are you done? Beautiful. So let me spell out how her name is spelt. S-T-E-P-H. We're doing good so far, right? E-N-I-E. Stephenie. Not Steph with an A. No, Stephenie. And then her last name is M-E-Y-E-R. Meyer. Or Meyer. But not Myers. right? Isn't that crazy? She released Twilight, the first book, in 2005. And then for the next 3 years, she consecutively released New Moon, which is the second book, Eclipse, which is the third, and Breaking Dawn, which is the fourth book in the saga. So Breaking Dawn was released in 2008. So 3 years. Or 4 if you really... So 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, right? She also has several extra releases within the Twilight universe, like Britannia's Short Life, Life and Death, Midnight Sun, the illustrated guide, the graphic novels. Some of these happened on the anniversaries of the releases, like 2010, 5 years after, Britannia's Short Life was released. Britannia's Short Life is a short story based around one of the vampires that we meet in Eclipse, very, very briefly of Eclipse. Midnight Sun is another one of her releases. It was released in 2020, and Midnight Sun is a retelling of Twilight, the first book, but from Edward's perspective. There is also one release that has not been released yet, and that she is teasing, and has been teasing for probably about 10 years, and it is a plot continuation of what happens after Breaking Dawn, basically, surrounding Jacob and Renesmee. If Jacob and Renesmee are not familiar names to you, don't worry about it. That's fine. That's fine. We'll get to it. If these are familiar names to you, yes, it is exactly what you think it is. The fanfictions are coming to life, and I am morbidly interested, in the same way that I would be very interested in like watching someone like eat their lover. Is that too revealing? So Twilight, the story of a girl who moves to Forks, falls in love with a guy, and he turns out to be some supernatural being, came to Stephenie Meyer in a dream. She dreamt about two people, a girl and a boy, sitting in a meadow. The boy was talking about how he loved her so much and so deeply, but also really, really, really wanted to kill her. And she got so fascinated by this dynamic of like, are they going to make it work? She was so intrigued about the story that she saw in her dream that she woke up, went directly to her computer and started writing down her entire dream. And she continued writing until she got to the end of what we can only presume is like the end of Twilight. And then she went back to the dream again, or the beginning of the dream, and kind of wrote backwards until she got to the beginning of the story. And she wrote all of this in 3 months. Okay, all of this is revealed in the big interview that happens at the beginning of the official illustrated guide. She wrote this in 3 months' time, having 2 toddlers. She had no intention of releasing it. She had no intention of like really showing anyone anything. And then she talked to her sister about the thing that she'd just written. Like, she'd spent 3 months just writing this thing. Her sister read it and then was adamant that she had to send it out to publishers and agents and stuff. I think that's how you get a literary agent. You write something and then send it out, and if people are interested in you and interested in the work that you do, then they'll take you on board, and then you'll send it to publishers and stuff. And then she started sending it around, and it got picked up, and suddenly it was a phenomena, and it got so popular basically overnight. And she started touring with her book, like doing midnight releases, stuff like that. It got a film adaptation deal, and the film came out in 2008, so the year that Breaking Dawn was released. Twilight, the book Twilight, spent 50 consecutive weeks on the New York Times best-selling list, and when she had released all 4 of her books, she was the first author to have the 4 top spots on the USA Today's year-end bestseller list. So Twilight, New Moon, Eclipse and Breaking Dawn all in the top 4 spots. And she's the first author to have ever done this, which is like a huge feat. Like that's a huge accomplishment. The Twilight craze during 2005, 2008 time, it was like a different kind of fandom because you didn't have the big sites like Tumblr being like super active. You didn't have like TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and all of these places where fans now congregate, where we now meet and talk and chat and share. You had to really like seek people out on like, I don't know, twilight.com, Stephenie Meyer's on website, fandom, like fanfiction.net, like you had to seek people out. And personally, at this point in time, like I was like 6. I did not have the Wi-Fi, the internet access to be able to have any kind of community with people online. So Twilight to me was always very personal. Anyway, I do really think that it is now time for us to really get our little hands onto the first chapter of Twilight. To celebrate this, I do have an apple, the forbidden fruit, Eve taking the first bite, you know, sinning, whatever. Anyone with a fear of mouth sounds, please just skip 10 seconds from right now. Pink lady. Really juicy. So, my book is very ratty-tatty. I've taken 1,000 notes. First page, we're not even at the first chapter, but the beginning, it says, "But of the tree of knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die." Genesis 2:17. So of course, because Stephenie is Mormon, and because there is so much Christian symbolism within the story, within the books, within, you know, whatever, the themes of it all, she of course is opening with the Bible verse. Yeah. Honestly, like Catholicism is coming back. Like style-wise, Catholicism is coming back. Preface. I'd never given much thought to how I would die. Immediately I'm stopping. Pause. Iconic. That's iconic. What the fuck? You're starting your teen series about wanting to kiss some very hot vampire with this. Like, this is a horror novel. It's so good, guys. Okay, let's read a bit of the preface. I'd never given much thought to how I would die, though I'd had a reason enough in the last few months. But even if I had, I would not have imagined it like this. I stared without breathing across the long room into the dark eyes of the hunter. And he looked pleasantly back at me. Surely it was a good way to die, in the place of someone else, someone I loved, noble even. That ought to count for something. I knew if I'd never gone to Forks, I wouldn't be facing death now. But, terrified as I was, I couldn't bring myself to regret the decision. When life offers you a dream so far beyond any of your expectations, it's not reasonable to grieve when it comes to an end. The hunter smiled in a friendly way as he sauntered forward to kill me. Like, you don't understand how excited I am right now. I love this series. First impressions. She's going to die. At the end of this book, she's dying. Okay? She's meeting a hunter. Who's that? Interesting. Someone dangerous. Someone who will kill her. Okay. And he's smiling in a friendly way. The juxtaposition. Interesting. Okay. We have things to talk about. I'm so excited. First chapter. Chapter 1. First sight. My mother drove me to the airport with the windows rolled down. It was 75 degrees in Phoenix, the sky a perfect cloudless blue. I was wearing my favorite shirt, sleeveless white eyelet lace. I was wearing it as a farewell gesture. My carry-on item was a parka. And also, I've put a note here and a cactus, because in the film, when she is getting into and out of that car before she gets on the little aircraft to take her to Forks, she's carrying like a tiny little cactus. And it's the same when she gets into the car when Charlie picks her up. She holds this little cactus, and I'm just wondering, is that a carry-on item? Every time I watch the film, I go, Did it get a seat on its own? Did you hold the little cactus the entire way around? Like, why do you have a cactus? Anyway. In the Olympic Peninsula of Northwest Washington State, a small town named Forks exists under a near constant cover of clouds. It rains on this inconsequential town more than any other place in the United States of America. It was from this town and its gloomy, omnipresent shade that my mother escaped with me when I was only 5 months old. It was in this town that I'd be compelled to spend a month every summer until I was 14. That was the year I finally put my foot down. These past 3 summers, my dad, Charlie, vacationed with me in California for 2 weeks instead. Okay, first page, we have a lot of information. We know what Forks is. We know it rains a lot there. More than anywhere else in the US. She's from Phoenix, very sunny. We also know that Charlie is her dad and her parents are divorced. And she doesn't live with him. It seems like they don't have that close of a relationship. Bella, my mum said to me, the last of 1,000 times before I got on the plane, you don't have to do this. My mum looks like me, except with short hair and laugh lines. I felt a spasm of panic as I stared at her wide, childlike eyes. How could I leave my loving, erratic, harebrained mother to fend for herself? Of course she had Phil now, so the bills would probably get paid, there would be food in the refrigerator, gas in her car, and someone to call when she got lost, but still... I want to go, I lied. I'd always been a bad liar, but I've been saying this lie so frequently lately that it sounded almost convincing now. The relationship that Bella has with Renee is really fascinating to me. We are on page 4 and I'm already I know everything. I know that she doesn't really have a relationship with her dad. She is forcing herself to move to Forks because of some kind of thing with her mum. Her mum feels bad for her going. Also, her mum is very, I would say the impression I have is immature. Bella is talking about who's like taking care of her mum, as if she now calls Bella every time she gets lost in order for Bella to like come and pick her up. Who's gonna pay the bills and who's gonna keep food in the fridge? Like, Bella is very parentified. Okay, she's basically taking care of her mum when it should be the other way around, right? We move on. Renee says that she can come home whenever, and then she journeys all the way to Forks, detailing kind of having to take 2 planes. Basically, it's quite like a long journey. The last plane is very small, and then she has to get picked up in Port Angeles, I think. Charlie had really been fairly nice about the whole thing. He seemed genuinely pleased that I was coming to live with him for the first time, with any degree of permanence. He'd already gotten me registered for high school and was going to help me get a car. But it was sure to be awkward with Charlie. Neither of us was what anyone would call verbose, and I don't know what there was to say regardless. I knew he was more than a little confused by my decision. Like my mother before me, I hadn't made it a secret of my distaste for Forks. It's raining. Charlie waits for her when she is landing in Port Angeles with his car. Basically, Charlie is the police chief of Forks, so he has the police car with like the lights and stuff as well. Charlie gave me an awkward one-armed hug when I stumbled my way off the plane. It's good to see you, Bells, he said, smiling as he automatically caught and steadied me. You haven't changed much. How's Renee? Mum's fine. It's good to see you too, Dad. I wasn't allowed to call him Charlie to his face. I think that's a very white people thing. I had a friend in high school who, when she got upset with her parents, she would call her mum by her first name. And her mum would be so annoyed and angry. And I think it got to a point where I think my friend just started doing it out of habit. So when she would talk about her parents, she would talk about Diana. That tells us a lot about Bella's relationship to Charlie. It's like she doesn't know him well enough to call him dad in a way. Dad is very intimate and personal, and so the fact that in her head she's not using dad, but she is using mum, that does say something. I had only a few bags. Most of my Arizona clothes were too permeable for Washington. My mum and I had pooled our resources to supplement my winter wardrobe, but it was still very scanty. It all fit easily into the trunk of the cruiser. I found a good car for you, really cheap, he announced when we were strapped in. What kind of car? I was suspicious of the way he said good car for you, as opposed to just good car. Well, It's a truck, actually. A Chevy. Where did you find it? Do you remember Billy Black down at La Push? La Push is the tiny Indian reservation on the coast. Okay, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the big Indian reservation on the coast, elephant in the room. This was written in 2005. There are some outdated terms. So, like, as far as I know, there are no slurs, but it's very, like, the way that Stephenie keeps referencing to these indigenous people, it doesn't feel very good. And the way that she, like, also describes some of the people, the way that she describes them is just... Ooh, leaves a big ick in my mouth, basically. He's in a wheelchair now, Charlie continued when I didn't respond. So he can't drive anymore, and he offered to sell me his truck cheap. What year is it? I could see from his change of expression that this really was a question he was hoping I wouldn't ask. Well, Billy's done a lot of work on the engine. It's only a few years old, really. Dad. She almost called him Charlie there. Dad. I don't really know anything about cars. I wouldn't be able to fix it if anything went wrong, and I couldn't afford a mechanic. Really, Bella, the thing runs great. They don't build them like that anymore. Basically, Charlie's already bought her this car. It's free, and so she accepts it. They're on the way home. Let's continue. I want you to be happy here. He was looking ahead at the road when he said this. Charlie wasn't comfortable with expressing his emotions out loud. I inherited that from him. So I was looking straight ahead as I responded. There's a reason why I deeply identify with this girl. Love her. It's Lee. That's really nice, Dad. Thanks, I really appreciate it. No need to add that my being happy in Forks is an impossibility. He didn't need to suffer along with me. And I never looked a free truck in the mouth. Or engine. It's a weird joke to make, Stephenie. What do you mean? Look a truck in the mouth. I know because she's rewriting the saying, whatever, but that could have been edited. Next. We exchanged a few more comments on the weather, which was wet. And that was pretty much it for conversation. We stared out of the window in silence. It was beautiful, of course. I couldn't deny that. Everything was green. The trees, their trunks covered with moss, their branches hanging with canopy of it, the ground covered with ferns. Even the air filtered down greenly through the leaves. It was too green. An alien planet. I love the way that Stephenie writes nature. It's gorgeous. She knows how to write vibes. You can place me anywhere in the world at any time. Give me the Twilight book and I will imagine Forks and the vibes and the tones and the sounds and the smells of just like driving through the Washington forests. Like, she's great at that. Good job, Stephenie. Eventually we made it to Charlie's. He still lived in a small 2-bedroom house that he bought with my mother in the early days of their marriage. Those were the only kind of days that their marriage had. The early ones. There, parked in the street in front of the house that never changed, was my new to me, truck. It was a faded red colour, with big rounded fenders and a bulbous cab. To my intense surprise, I loved it. I didn't know if it would run, but I could see myself in it. Plus, it was one of those solid iron affairs that never gets damaged. The kind that you see at the scene of an accident, paint unscratched, surrounded by the pieces of the foreign car it had destroyed. You can really make the argument that this book is also a love story between Bella and her truck. She's a country girl. Yeehaw. She gets into her bedroom with her dad. I do want to talk just tiny bit about her bedroom. Her bedroom is very iconic. It's like you have like crochet blankets everywhere, kind of old wooden furniture. It's like blue, like it's painted blue. And has a little rocking chair in the corner and also like a desk with one of those like really like what we now would think of like a really old computer, secondhand essentially secondhand computer, because we need to just make sure that everyone is on the same page about the fact that Bella does not have a lot of money, Charlie does not have a lot of money, they are poor vibes, secondhand computer vibes, all a joke. And also she has a landline so she can contact her mum. One of the best things about Charlie is he doesn't hover. He left me alone to unpack and get settled, a feat that would have been altogether impossible for my mother. It was nice to be alone, not to have to smile and look pleased, a relief to stare dejectedly out the window at the sheeting rain and let just a few tears escape. I wasn't in the mood to go on a real crying jag. I would save that for bedtime, when I would have to think about the coming morning. Because Forks High School had a frightening total of only 357, now 58, students. There were more than 700 people in my junior class alone back home. All of the kids here had grown up together. Their grandparents had been toddlers together. I would be the new girl from the big city, a curiosity, a freak. Maybe if I looked like a girl from Phoenix, I could work this to my advantage. But physically, I'd never fit in anywhere. I should be tan, sporty, blonde, a volleyball player, or cheerleader perhaps. All the things that go with living in the Valley of the Sun. Instead, I was ivory-skinned, without even the excuse of blue eyes or red hair, despite the constant sunshine. I'd always been slender, but soft somehow, obviously not an athlete. I didn't have the necessary hand-eye coordination to play sports without humiliating myself, and harming both myself and anyone else who stood close. It wasn't just physically I'd never fit in. I didn't relate well to people my age. Maybe the truth was that I didn't relate well to people, period. Even my mother, who I was closer to than anyone else on the planet, was never in harmony with me, never on exactly the same page. Sometimes I wondered if I was seeing the same things through my eyes that the rest of the world was seeing through theirs. Maybe there was a glitch in my brain. But the cause didn't matter. All that mattered was the effect. And tomorrow will be just the beginning. I need you guys to understand. Bella is autistic. I'm diagnosing her right now. Right this second. Page 10. Page 10. I'm diagnosing Bella Swan. I'm saying that as someone maybe with a bit of a personal stake in that. She's saying that she's never fit in with anyone. Not her peers, not her mum, not human beings in general. And that she feels deeply on the outside, alienated, ostracized from people around her. And it's not just physically that she doesn't fit in. It's meant like she's seeing the world differently than the rest of the people. Remember this. This will be very incredibly important. We have a little page break now. So basically we're jumping ahead in time until the day after, when Bella is tossing and turning in the night, really worrying about going to school. I didn't sleep well that night, even after I was done crying. The constant whooshing of the rain and wind across the roof wouldn't fade into the background. I pulled the faded quilt over my head and later added the pillow too. But I couldn't fall asleep until after midnight, when the rain finally settled into quieter drizzle. Breakfast with Charlie was a quiet event. He wished me good luck at school. I thanked him, knowing his hope was wasted. Good luck tended to avoid me. Charlie left first. Off to the police station, there was his wife and family. After he left, I sat at the old square oak table in one of the 3 unmatching chairs and examined his small kitchen, with its dark panelled walls, bright yellow cabinets, and white linoleum floor. Nothing was changed. My mother had painted the cabinets 18 years ago in an attempt to bring some sunshine into the house. Over the small fireplace in the adjoining handkerchief-sized family room was a row of pictures. And these pictures are like wedding photos of Charlie and Renee, baby photos of Bella, like her like graduation from dance and whatever, pictures of Renee. It was impossible, being in this house, not to realise that Charlie had never gotten over my mum. It made me really uncomfortable. I didn't want to be too early to school, but I couldn't stay in this house anymore. It was just drizzling still, not enough to soak me through immediately as I reached for the house key that was always hidden under the eaves by the door and locked up. The sloshing of my new waterproof boots was unnerving. Finding the school wasn't difficult, though I'd never been there before. The school was, like most other things, just off the highway. It was not obvious that it was a school, only the sign, which declared it to be Forks High School, made me stop. It looked like a collection of matching houses, built with maroon-coloured bricks. There were so many trees and shrubs I couldn't see its size at first. Where was the feel of the institution? I wondered nostalgically. Where was the chain-link fences, the metal detectors? I parked in front of the first building, which had a small sign over the door reading "Front Office." Inside, it was brightly lit and warmer than I'd hoped. The office was small, a little waiting area with padded folding chairs, orange flecked commercial carpet, notices and awards cluttering the walls, a big clock ticking loudly. Plants grew everywhere in large plastic pots, as if there weren't enough greenery outside. The room was cut in half by a long counter, cluttering with wire baskets full of papers and brightly lit coloured flyers taped onto its front. There were 3 desks behind the counter, one of which was manned by a large red-haired woman wearing glasses. "Can I help you?" "I'm Isabella Swan," I informed her, and I saw the immediate awareness light her eyes. I was expected. A topic of gossip, no doubt. Daughter of the chief's flighty ex-wife. Come home at last. "Of course," she said. Bella gets all of her papers, the map of the school, whatever. She gets out, finds her way to her truck to sit in that and have a little hyperventilation moment. Bella has a lot of anxiety. She doesn't really want to get gawked at. And I feel like that's just normal. Like, I would also be incredibly nervous having my first day in like the middle of the semester in a town where everyone knows each other. Like, a thing that you really need to remember is that Bella has lived a life in Phoenix, one of like the big cities in America, where she is like anonymous all the time. I am the opposite. Like, I'm from a small town where, you know, you'll basically know all of the people your age. And when I moved to London for the first time, the acknowledgement that you leave your house and basically whoever you meet at any point after having left your house, you'll never see any of those people again, is such a weird feeling. You can dress and act basically however you want, obviously within reason, because you are basically completely anonymous. And Bella's lived that kind of life where she's been anonymous and has kind of really lived in the background of things. And now she's coming to a town where everyone knows everyone else, and she's the odd one out. And she's already been the odd one out, but like anonymously so, kind of forgotten in the background. And now she's like on display. I feel like she's very justified in her not wanting the future to happen and not, you know, wanting people to write about her and to give her like that much attention, and to look at her and stare at her. Like, I feel like she's well within her rights to be like freaked out about that. Once I got around the cafeteria, Building 3 was easy to spot. A large black 3 was painted on a white square in the east corner. I felt my breathing gradually creeping towards hyperventilation as I approached the door. I tried holding my breath as I followed 2 unisex raincoats through the door. The classroom was small. The people in front of me stopped just inside the door to hang up their coats in a long row of hooks. I copied them. They were 2 girls, one a porcelain-coloured blonde and the other also pale with light brown hair. At least my skin wouldn't be standout here. It was harder for my new classmates to stare at me in the back, but somehow they managed. I kept my eyes down on the reading list the teacher had given me. It was fairly basic. Bronte, Chaucer, Faulkner. I'd already read everything. Bella's big reader. I want to examine a little bit her favourite books and the books that she keeps mentioning, because I think that does have something to do with her character. But yeah, she's a big reader, loves books, loves reading, specifically classics, it seems to be. When the bell rang, a nasal buzzing sound, a gangly boy with skin problems, rude, and hair black as an oil slick, leaned across the aisle to talk to me. "You're Isabella Swan, aren't you?" Am I going to do this in like a very American accent, or am I just going to continue like basically doing RP? Because it sounds wrong when I say these lines that the characters are saying without putting on an American accent. I'm not going to do that. "You're Isabella Swan, aren't you?" He looked like the overtly helpful chess club type. "Bella," I corrected. Everyone within a 3-seat radius turned to look at me. "Where's your next class?" he asked. I had to check my bag. Government with Jefferson, Building 6. There was nowhere to look without meeting curious eyes. "I'm headed towards Building 4. I could show you the way." Definitely over helpful. "I'm Eric," he added. "So this is a lot different than Phoenix, huh?" he asked. "Very. It doesn't rain much there, does it?" 3 or 4 times a year? "Wow, what must that be like?" he wondered. "Sunny," I told him. "You don't look very tan." "My mother is part albino." He studied my face apprehensively and I sighed. It looked like clouds and a sense of humour didn't mix. A few months of this and I'd forget how to use sarcasm. I don't feel like that was sarcastic, Bella. I feel like that was just a very poorly delivered joke, perhaps. Well, good luck, he said as I touched the handle. They've gone to gym now. Maybe we'll have some other classes together. He sounded hopeful. I smiled at him vaguely and went inside. After 2 classes, I started to recognize several of the faces in each class. There was always someone braver than the others who would introduce themselves and ask me questions about how I was liking folks. One girl sat next to me in both Trig and Spanish, and she walked with me to the cafeteria for lunch. She was tiny, several inches shorter than my 5 feet 4 inches. 5 feet 4 is so... She's a tiny girl. She's so small and cute and tiny. No, she's very small. 5 foot 4? That's small. How small? How is that in centimeters? I don't know. I'm European. But her wildly curly dark hair made up for a lot of difference between our heights. I couldn't remember her name. We sat at the end of a full table with several of her friends who she introduced me to. I forgot all of their names as soon as she spoke them. They seemed impressed by her bravery in speaking to me. The boy from English, Eric, waved at me from across the room. It was there, sitting in the lunchroom, trying to make conversation with 7 curious strangers, that I first saw them. And I've written in my note, it's happening. It's happening. Phil, it's happening. Guys, this is where we get so fucking serious. It's going to be a lot of reading. This is really important. Take notes. This will be on the test. They were sitting in the corner of the cafeteria, as far away from where I sat as possible in the long room. There were 5 of them. They weren't talking, and they weren't eating. They each had a tray of untouched food in front of them. They weren't gawking at me, unlike most of the other students, so it was safe to stare at them without the fear of meeting an excessively interested pair of eyes. But it was none of those things that caught and held my attention. They didn't look anything alike. Of the 3 boys, one was big, muscled like a serious weightlifter, with dark curly hair. Another was taller, leaner, but still muscular, and honey blonde. The last was lanky, less bulky, with untidy bronze-coloured hair. He was more boyish than the others, who looked more like they could be in college, or even teachers here, rather than students. Remember that, boyish. The others looked much older. Boyish. The girls were opposites. The tall one was statuesque. She had a beautiful figure, the kind you saw on the cover of Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, the kind that made every girl around her take a hit on her self-esteem by just being in the same room. Her hair was golden, gently waving to the middle of her back. The short girl was pixie-like, thin in the extreme, with small features. Her hair was a deep black, cropped short and pointing in every direction. And yet, they were all exactly alike. Every one of them was chalky pale, the palest of all the students living in this sunless town. Paler than me, the albino. They all had very dark eyes despite the range in hair tones. They also had dark shadows under those eyes, purplish, bruise-like shadows, as if they were all suffering from a sleepless night, or almost done recovering from a broken nose. Though their noses, all of their features, were straight, perfect, angular. But all this is not why I couldn't look away. I stared because their faces, so different, so similar, were all devastatingly, inhumanely beautiful. They were faces you would never expected to see except perhaps on the airbrushed pages of a fashion magazine, or painted by an old master as the face of an angel. It was hard to decide who was the most beautiful, maybe the perfect blonde girl, or the bronze-coloured boy. They were all looking away from each other, away from the other students. And then, the small girl, the pixie-like girl, she gets up, gets a tray of untouched food, and goes and deposits it in the bin. But the thing about the way she walks is that she's very, model-like, kind of bouncing, floating in a way. If you've ever done, if you're an actor, and you've done Laban, she's definitely a glide. And perhaps a bit of a dab. Who are they? I asked the girl from a... That's sounded so... Who are they? She's probably asking more like, who are they? Who are they? I asked the girl from my Spanish class, whose name I'd forgotten. As she looked up to see who I meant, though already knowing probably from my tone, suddenly he looked at her. The thinner one, the boyish one, the youngest perhaps. He looked at my neighbour for just a fraction of a second, and then his dark eyes flickered to mine. He looked away quickly, more quickly than I could, though in a flush of embarrassment I dropped my eyes at once. In that brief flash of a glance, his face held nothing of interest. It was as if she'd called his name, and he'd looked up with an involuntary response, already having decided not to answer. Curious. Very curious. My neighbour giggled in embarrassment, looking at the table like I did. That's Edward and Emmett Cullen, and Rosalie and Jasper Hale. The one who just left was Alice Cullen. They all lived together with Dr. Cullen and his wife. She said this under her breath. Strange, unpopular names, I thought. The kinds of names grandparents had. But maybe that was in vogue here, small town names? I finally remembered that my neighbour was called Jessica, a perfectly common name. Okay, so we now know a little bit of fact about Jessica. Jessica is small, and she has really wild brown curly hair, which is completely opposite of the image you have of Jessica, of being kind of like a sun-kissed blonde sporty type of gal. Anna Kendrick's portrayal of Jessica is just perfect, but I, without really thinking much of it, have always had an image of Jessica being very like sporty and blonde, and she's not. I wonder why I would think that she is sporty and blonde. Also, I don't know if this is just because I live in the UK. Edward is not an uncommon name. Eddie. Edward. Ted. No. They're all together, though. Emmett and Rosalie, and Jasper and Alice, I mean. And they live together. Her voice had held all the shock and condemnation of a small town, I thought critically. But if I was being honest, I had to admit that even in Phoenix, it would cause gossip. Which ones are the Cullens? I asked. They don't look related. Oh, they're not. Dr. Cullen is really young, in his 20s or early 30s. They're all adopted. The Hales are brother and sister, twins, the blondes, and they're foster children. They look a little old to be foster children. Oh, they are now. Jasper and Rosalie are both 18, but they've been with Mrs. Cullen since they were 8. She's their aunt or something like that. I love Jessica so much. You don't understand. I love this girl. And the way that she talks is just, she's so fun. That's really kind of nice, Bella says. For them to take care of all those kids like that when they're so young and everything. I guess so, Jessica admitted reluctantly, and I got the impression that she didn't like the doctor and his wife for some reason. With the glances that she was throwing at the adopted children, I would presume the reason was jealousy. I think that Mrs. Cullen can't have any kids though, she added, as if that lessened their kindness. Okay. I have some thoughts here. I need to remind everyone that we are seeing this entirely from Bella's perspective. She will keep having these little quips, especially towards Jessica and other girls that we will meet later on in the series. And also perhaps a little bit from like Eric and also like other boys, but most directed towards Jessica and other girls. And things like, I got the impression that she didn't like the doctor and his wife for some reason, and I would presume the reason was jealousy, kind of like outrageous behavior from Jessica. This is from Bella's perspective. So when she says, I think the reason is jealousy, that's Bella's interpretation of the way that Jessica is talking and what she's saying. It doesn't necessarily mean that Jessica is actually like factually jealous. They just moved down 2 years ago from somewhere in Alaska, Jessica says. I felt a surge of pity and relief. Pity because as beautiful as they were outsiders, clearly not accepted. As I examined them, the youngest, one of the Cullens, looked up and met my gaze, this time with evident curiosity in his expression. As I looked swiftly away, it seemed to me that his glance held some kind of unmet expectation. Which one is the boy with the reddish-brown hair? He's a redhead. Edward is a redhead confirmed. He's a redhead. Slay. I peeked at him from the corner of my eye, and he was still staring at me, but not gawking like the other students had today. He had a slightly frustrated expression. I looked down again. That's Edward. He's gorgeous, of course, but don't waste your time. He doesn't date. Apparently none of the girls here are good looking enough for him. She sniffed, a clear case of the sour grapes. Bella's perspective. I wondered when he'd turn her down. And good for Jessica. Like, very clear, like, she went up to this boy who's like the most beautiful thing to have ever existed and gone, do you want to get to the movies? Do you want to hang out? Do you want to like go and study together? And he's turned her down. And that's why apparently she had sour grapes. Or maybe he's just weird. Maybe he's weird, okay? Maybe she has the right to feel a bit fucking weird about these people who are acting like the strangest motherfuckers in town. I bit my lip to hide my smile. Trademark. This will be something occurring. I think we should have a lip bite count. Canonically, lip bite 1. I bit my lip to hide my smile. Then I glanced at him again. His face was turned away, but I thought his cheek appeared lifted, as if he was smiling too. Lunch ends. They go do biology. She meets Angela, who's one of the people that she was sitting at this table with. When we entered the classroom, Angela went to sit at the blacktop table exactly like the ones I was used to. She already had a neighbor. In fact, all of the tables were filled but one. Next to the center aisle, I recognized Edward Cullen by his unusual hair sitting next to a single open seat. Just as I passed, he suddenly went rigid in his seat. He stared at me again, meeting my eyes with the strangest expression on his face. It was hostile, furious. I looked away quickly, shocked, going red again. I stumbled over a book in the walkway and had to catch myself on the edge of a table. The girl sitting there giggled. God, I hate girls giggling. I'd noticed that his eyes were black, coal black. I kept my eyes down as I went to sit by him, bewildered by the antagonistic stare he'd given me. I didn't look up as he set his book on the table and I took my seat, but I saw his posture change from the corner of my eye. He was leaning away from me, sitting on the extreme edge of his chair and averting his face like he smelled something bad. Inconspicuously, I sniffed my hair. It smelled like strawberries, the scent of my favorite shampoo. It seemed like an innocent enough odor. I let my hair fall over my right shoulder, making a dark curtain between us, and tried to pay attention to the teacher. During the whole class, he never relaxed his stiff position on the edge of his chair, sitting as far away from me as possible. I could see his hand on his left leg was clenched into a fist, tendons standing out under his pale skin. This, too, he never relaxed. He had the long sleeves of his white shirt pushed up to his elbows, and his forearm was surprisingly hard and muscular beneath his light skin. He wasn't nearly as slight as he'd looked next to his burly brother. Stephenie? Horny jail? He's 17. How about he is 17? Don't talk about his muscular, hard forearm. He's fucking 17. You're a Mormon. I don't understand. What was wrong with him? Was this normal behavior? I questioned my judgment on Jessica's bitterness at lunch today. Maybe she was not as resentful as I thought. Yes. Maybe he's a weirdo. Ever thought about that? God, be a girl's girl. I peeked up at him one more time and regretted it. He was staring down at me again, his black eyes full of revulsion. As I flinched away from him, shrinking against my chair, the phrase, "if looks could kill," suddenly ran through my mind. At that moment, the bell rang loudly, making me jump, and Edward Cullen was out of his seat. Fluidly, he rose. He was much taller than I thought. His back to me, and he was out the door before anyone else was out of their seat. "Aren't you Isabella Swan?" a male voice asked. I looked up to see a cute, baby-faced boy, his pale blonde hair carefully gelled into orderly spikes, smiling at me in a friendly way. He obviously didn't think I smelled bad. "Bella," I corrected, with a smile. "I'm Mike." "Hi, Mike." "Do you need any help finding your next class?" "So, did you stab Edward Cullen with a pencil or what? I've never seen him act like that." I cringed. So I wasn't the only one who had noticed, and apparently that wasn't Edward Cullen's usual behaviour. I decided to play dumb. Was that the boy I sat next to in biology? I asked artlessly. Yes, he said. He looked like he was in pain or something. I don't know, I responded. I never spoke to him. He's a weird guy. Mike lingered by me instead of heading to the dressing room. If I were lucky enough to sit by you, I would have talked to you. Basically, if she's in PE, she doesn't have to play because she doesn't have her gym things with her, I think. Or they let her sit out, which she's happy about because she'll fucking kill someone with a ball. That's for sure. There's one thing about Bella. She is clumsy. And then the final bell rang at last. I walked slowly to the office to return my paperwork. The rain had drifted away, but the wind was strong and colder. I wrapped my arms around myself. When I walked into the warm office, I almost turned around and walked back out. Edward Cullen stood at the desk in front of me. I recognized again that tousled bronze hair. He didn't appear to notice the sound of my entrance. I stood pressed against the back wall, waiting for the receptionist to be free. He was arguing with her in a low, attractive, horny jail voice. I quickly picked up the gist of the argument. He was trying to trade from 6th hour biology to another time, any other time. I just couldn't believe that this was about me. The door opened again, and the cold wind suddenly gusted through the room, rustling the papers on the desk, swirling my hair around my face. The girl who came in merely stepped into the desk, placed a note in the wire basket, and walked back out again. But Edward Cullen's back stiffened, and he turned slowly to glare at me. His face was absurdly handsome, with piercing, hate-filled eyes. For an instant, I felt a thrill of genuine fear, raising the hairs on my arms. The look only lasted a second, but it chilled me more than the freezing wind. He turned back to the receptionist. "Never mind then," he said, hastily in a voice like velvet. Okay, let me do my velvet voice. "I can see that it's impossible. Thank you so much for your help." And he turned around on his heel without another look at me and disappeared out the door. I headed back to Charlie's house, fighting tears the whole way there. And that's the end. That's the end of the chapter. A little round of applause for everyone involved. I think it's well written. I'm sorry, shoot me. Fucking shoot. I think it's well written. I'm having a great time. Bella might be the original, not like other girls, girl, but I don't necessarily hate it. Like, I don't dislike it. You know what I mean? Like, yes, she's a bit like, oh, I'm so clumsy. Or I'm, these are the girls that are, pretty, and I'm not like that. And I'm, But she's not, at least at this moment in time, she's not annoying. She has her faults. Please don't talk about Jessica like that. You don't know her like that. We've already talked a bit about how, we are seeing everything from Bella's perspective. Her interpretation of the conversations and the people around her are not necessarily the truth of what is happening, but it is her interpretation of the social interaction. Also, I think we need to, from here on out, invent horny jail for both Bella and Stephenie, to be completely honest. We've had 2 horny jail situations in the first chapter alone. So congrats to all involved. Let's also just very quickly have a little look at the character map. For everyone listening, hello, let me describe it to you. We have Bella's parents, which are Renee and Charlie. They are divorced. All right. We have Bella underneath. We have there is one mention of Phil, which is presumably Renee's husband or boyfriend or, someone. And also, Bella has named him Phil and not like stepdad, my stepdad. So there's a bit of I don't fully know this guy yet. We've also met people like Jessica, Mike, Eric, and Angela. These have been mentioned by name. Important to remember, these are kind of like the normal friends, the human people. We see that there might be some slight crushes, unreciprocated, obviously, from Eric, maybe from Mike. There has been a slight little flirt happening there. And then you have the Cullens. So you have Edward Cullen, and his brother is Emmett Cullen, and Emmett Cullen is in a relationship with Rosalie Hale. And Rosalie Hale has a twin called Jasper Hale. And Jasper Hale is in a relationship with Alice Cullen, who is Emmett and Edward's sister. These have parents, or adopted parents, which is Carlisle Cullen. Rosalie and Jasper are the niece and nephew of Esme Cullen, who is the wife of Carlisle Cullen. Also, Carlisle is the doctor. And then we also know about Billy Black, who's in a wheelchair. And he is a Quileute, so he is a Native American, or part of the Native American tribe, who is also there up at Forks. That is what we have. So for next week, the research question will be the criticisms of Twilight. I will go in depth about all of the things that I hear quite most commonly about why people don't like the series, or the criticisms that they have for it, and we'll talk about if I find them valid or not, and if certain of these criticisms are things that we're gonna keep track of all the way through this project. And then we are going to tackle chapter 2 of Twilight, and chapter 2 is called Open Book. Thank you so much for listening, tuning in, watching if you are watching. And I really hope to see you back. If you want direct updates of when this is being posted next, think of subscribing to the Moth Club and then also Twilight Revisited. And you'll get an email every time I post so that you can, watch it directly. It's been really lovely. I'm really excited for next week and next time. Thank you so much, and I will see you very soon. All right, guys.